I appreciate the very good works of the conference, this conference. I find it informative, and it has rendered, I believe, a message of able tourist salesmanship. Also, I have been impressed by the big presence of young people. They constitute half the present and all the future. And therefore, investment in ideas to them is a very rewarding enterprise. I have always maintained that the signature tune of youthful people is they are more enthusiastic, more idealistic, more of contributors to newness, better mixers socially and culturally, and always quicker learners, all of which are qualities that our societies and our civilizations very much cherish. In tradition of the forum, of this forum, I would like to speak a bit about Sudan. The Sudan is now much maligned in the public image. This has been the result of misgovernment in the country. However, in spite of this, there are certain attractions I would like to emphasize, maybe to give you the feeling and the will to see for yourselves this country. Sudan has a very rich history and a very rich geography. Starting by the history, we had the Meroitic civilization, which continued more than any other classical civilization for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. Then our country became peacefully Christian, Orthodox Christian, for another 1,000 years. Then it became Islamic in the majority for up till now about half a millennium. But the peculiarity of Islam in Sudan is that it penetrated peacefully, not through any armed conflict. So this gives the country, I believe, a very rich history. It also has a very rich geography because the country represents what may be described as a microcosm of Africa. All the African diversity you can speak of or think about, you will find within Sudan's boundaries. North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Then, thirdly, the country is very rich, although this is not well known, in archaeology. For instance, we have more pyramids than Egypt. We have got about 240 pyramids. And we have also certain archaeological remains that are nowhere else in the Nile Valley. That is, there is the remain of a university, an institute for learning, that is about 300 years before Christ, all of which are remains that should be seen to be believed, because in the general understanding of things, Sudan archaeology is not well known. The other point that I want to mention about Sudan is how the country is very, very foreigner friendly. In fact, we have in our traditions statements about men or women whose generosity is being praised because they awaj al-darib. Now, awaj al-darib means that they have blocked the highway to get the guests at home to be generous to them. So this is a tradition. Everyone who goes to Sudan, irrespective of the political complexion of the country, will realize this friendliness to foreigners. Although, ironically enough, we had the bloodiest encounter with foreign interference. All the conquerors that conquered Egypt have tried to conquer the Sudan and failed. All of them. The Persians, the Romans, the Greeks, the Arabs, you name it, have all, after conquering Egypt, tried to conquer the Sudan and failed. Also, the British conquest of Sudan in the latest part of the 19th century was the bloodiest encounter that they faced. In the Battle of Omdurman, people who perished on our side were 11,000. So after all this bloody encounter, somehow the page was turned and the country became very, very foreigner friendly. Finally, in this respect of salesmanship towards the Sudan, I would speak not of green summer. In summer we have a high, very high temperature. But I can speak of green winter. So when next time you shiver from winter in the West, you can find a very warm resort in Sudan. I am neither a government official, in fact, I am an opposition figure in Sudan, nor a tourist promoter. So I wondered why I have been invited to speak to you. I reflected on this and thought that I must have been invited to broach the wider issues that are, of course, very relevant to the issue of tourism and business. But anyway, that's what I will do. Broach the wider issues involved in this type of conference. So, tighten your seat belts for the tour. I highly appreciate my invitation to address this important conference. 2 centuries ago, relations between countries involved strong-arm commercial relations, missions of geographical, archaeological, and biological discovery, but above all, struggle to dominate. Branding nations then hinged upon military power. Contrast between international relations then and now could not be more stark. Of course, military power still matters, although recent experiences of military assertion have exposed the limitations of superior military power in dealing with asymmetrical resistance. In terms of trained manpower and superior firepower, NATO could be expected to walk over its Taliban enemies in Afghanistan today. In reality, its forces are besieged by almost phantom forces. The current events of non-violent revolutions in the Middle East have shown how the well-supplied armies have been turned into spectators of the historic events shaping their countries. By the same token, the influence of the considerable external military powers is negligible. Soft power, meaning the ability to get your purpose done without the use of violence, has become more effective in the conduct of international relations today. The United Nations has established a peace and stability system. Human rights have become a humanistic creed, religion, overriding all considerations. Globalization has, through a free international market and the combined effect of emails, Facebook, Twitter, and other cyberspace tools and fora, along with SMS and other call phone facilities, interconnected peoples. The satellite channels revolutionized the media, and the modern means of transport facilitated travel, buttressing the effect of an interdependent Earth. However, no progress in the centripetal effects of globalization could eliminate the centrifugal effects of competing national interests and diverse cultural identities. Modernization advances the frontiers of globalization. National interests and cultural identities pull in the opposite direction, creating a dialectical synthesis between globalization and identity. In the following points, I elucidate my opinion on the current state of nation branding and the lines upon which it should develop in the future. Point number one. Democracy is increasingly becoming the peaceful means by which political forces in a country settle their differences. In their search for electoral support, political forces have to market themselves, branding themselves in terms of their ideologies and programs. In a world where aggressive military assertion has become outlawed, competition in the various fields of endeavor is through soft power. The position of the various nations in this competition is defined by certain indexes, which together define the brand. Second point, stability in the world today for a nation is contingent upon its ability to provide its citizens with law, order, livelihood, legitimate governance, human rights and basic freedoms, and international acceptance. Such provisions are preconditions for development, which today depend upon various factors, particularly investment, exports, and tourism. The challenge a nation faces in this respect is to attract investors, to access export markets, and to attract tourism. A rostrum of who's who for nations is necessary information for the would-be investors, the would-be importers, and the would-be tourists. Third point, people may differ about the aspects which should define a country's brand. There are 10 criteria to brand a country for the relevant purposes, namely the size and quality of its population, the stage of its development, particularly the infrastructures, the geopolitical location, the natural resources, the fauna and flora, its commitment to the rule of law, the climate, its economic policies and attitude to the freedom of the market, its history and archaeology, its culture, finally, entertainment. In a just world, branding nations upon these criteria would lead to a catalog of the brands providing the necessary information. The specialized agencies which prepare the indexes are from the developed world, where the standards are set and where the personnel are recruited. They tend to be more familiar with their own cultures and so less familiar with conditions in the developing world. Also, statistics in the developed world are available and more accurate. A question for this conference to deal with is how to involve personnel familiar with conditions in the developing world and how to improve their statistics. Fifth point. Apart from the brain drain problem, which taxes developing countries and makes them suffer big losses in terms of human capital, there is the problem of the internal brain drain, which means that the intellectual and cultural domination of the West brainwashes peoples in the rest of the world to view their problems in Western terms. Consequently, they may forsake things in which they have a comparative advantage and shift to things valued in the West, in attire, in cosmetics, and in architectural designs. They may simply imitate. They need to be persuaded that they could be branded in terms of their own identity and their own climate, which sometimes differs drastically from the West. This is another issue which such a non-profit making conference like yours should address. Sixth point. There are built-in asymmetries and inequalities between North and South of the planet Earth. They tend to favor the North, whatever nation branding may say, namely, the terms of trade, with the exception of oil, regularly favor industrial goods at the cost of raw materials. The international media are based in the North, particularly the United States of America. Their coverage tends to favor their own countries, which could interfere with the findings of the branding catalog. Many governments, especially dictatorships in our parts of the world, are corrupt. Many multinational companies, especially those dealing with strategic goods, such as oil and arms, manipulate their clients by corrupt means. Such practices have no place for objective branding. Many powerful countries have actually removed very important pieces of other people's history. For example, certain historical documents and important pieces of archaeological significance. Such items are priceless, and it is necessary to repatriate them. Seventh point. Nation branding is an important aspect of international relations. In the present peaceful world, where countries compete by soft power means, it is bound to achieve greater importance. However, as the revolution in communication and means of transport make peoples aware of their respective conditions, and as many factors are making the distribution of income and affluence more and more unequal, the world will continue to discover that it is not possible to protect the haves from the many have-nots. The haves are well armed by weapons of mass destruction which they cannot use. The have-nots, especially espousing non-governmental initiatives, could and would upset the apple cart. If this conference confines itself to the technical problems of nation branding without looking beyond to a free and fair world, it could be planting, it could be painting a cabin in a sinking ship. I come from a region whose three worlds, Arab, African, and Islamic, are volatile. If that volatility leads to another oil price hike, all the great expectations about a return from the brink in economic recovery will be dashed. The brand which we should all be seeking to market is that of a just, stable, and peaceful world. The fact that there is a general recovery from ideological excesses and a general acceptance of religious and cultural peaceful coexistence make that desired world possible if there is the will to achieve it. Eighth point, a matter which is not directly linked to nation branding in the economic related context is the problem of image. Many parts of the world suffer from image branding, which forms stereotypes, create prejudices, and sustain ethnic apartheid. Sub-Saharan Africa suffers from a widespread image problem. The Swiss archaeologist Charles Bonnet said that when he prepared for one of his missions, he was laughed at by some of his colleagues who said to him, "There is no history south of Egypt." William Adams, in his book, Nubia, A Corridor to Africa, has indicated an African continuity with ancient Egyptian civilization. Sheikh Anita Diop has outlined the black African origin of Egyptian civilization. Black Athena, by Martin Bernal, dwelt upon the death of Greek civilization to quote-unquote black Egyptian and Phoenician civilizations. So there is much civilizational intercourse supporting the view that no civilization is completely autarkic. In fact, some researchers have put the percentage of the homegrown elements in any civilization at no more than 15%. We should seek to address this sub-Saharan African image problem. Ninth point, there is an Arab image problem which sought to make the Arabs the embodiment of Oriental despotism. The prevalence of despotic regimes in the Arab world tended to sustain this view of Arab particularity. Yes, there are native sources of Arab dictatorship, blessed by many religious scholars. For example, Ibn Hijr al-Asqalani statement, quote, "We religious scholars are unanimous in recognizing the legitimacy of a ruler who has established his rule by force," unquote. However, there is currently a widespread popular search for democracy in the Arab world. The Arab regimes currently in office owe much to external factors that sustain them for the purpose of their own national security and the perceived security for the supply of oil. A survey conducted in 2010 on Arab youth in 9 Arab countries has shown how they desire democracy as their number one priority. The survey was released by a public relations firm reported by Time magazine in its 28th February 2011 issue. Nothing could be more convincing in erasing the image of Arab addiction to despotism than the level of current popular revolutions in the Arab world. Here again, there is a need for image replacement. The most important, point number 10, the most important image problem in the world today, especially in the West, is that of Islam. That it is the image that it is an irrational, violent religion. I have shown in many studies how the Quran acknowledges rational and empirical sources of knowledge. In fact, there is convincing evidence that Islam insists upon reconciliation between reason and revelation. It is true that some Muslims have given Islamic jihad an aggressive definition. However, in the Quran, it is clearly stated that jihad is a word with wide connotations, most of which relate to what may be called soft power or civil endeavor. It is only justified to be violent in self-defense. أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتَلُونَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا. To those against whom war is made, permission is given to fight because they are wronged. Many have claimed that Islam spread by violent conquest. In his book, The Preaching of Islam, Sir Thomas Arnold erased that mistaken view. In fact, the spread of Islam in Southeast Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Western Europe, and America today has taken place and is taking place at a time when Muslims are militarily the weakest of nations. Even the issue of terrorism, which has been espoused by some Muslim groups, is not a Muslim speciality. Robert Pape, in his book Dying to Win, proved beyond reasonable doubt that in all cultures, foreign occupation drove some resistance groups to the exercise of terrorist means, particularly self-emulation. In his recent book, A World Without Islam, Graham Fuller, former deputy director of the CIA National Council on Intelligence, maintained that the policies meted out to the inhabitants of the Middle East today would breed the same current reactions even if the inhabitants were not Muslims. In his book, he suggested that if we in the West really wanted to rid the world of these obnoxious behaviors, we should drastically change our policies along certain lines, namely, end our military occupation of other people's territories, settle the Palestinian problem on a just basis, and end our support of dictators, demythologize the oil trade, and use our considerable resources in development and welfare cooperation with the people in the region. Similar advices were given by Michael Schurer in his book Marching Toward Hell, in which he showed how the current policies are self-destructive for the West. 11th point. It is not beyond the concerns of a conference on nation branding to address the issue of image rectification. Nation branding will not function efficiently without the concept and belief in human equality. Of course, human equality is sanctified by all United Nations charters. But the gap between theory and practice in this respect is as wide as ever. How to bridge it should be one of our concerns. This conference should discuss the future of nation branding, look beyond it to the wider fields, and determine to follow up on its recommendations. So many excellent ideas are like the flowers that are, in the words of an English poet, Thomas Gray, quote, born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness on the desert air. Unquote. We should avoid such a fate so that our recommendations make a difference toward a better and just world. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for your reflections as well as your inspiration. Questions and comments, please.
Thank you and good morning. I'm Lolisa Kwize from Botswana. I'm currently working as community development with the government of Botswana and director for Kavangoto Youth Center. And I want to ask you, in your view, do you think the people of Sudan are enjoying the richness of your country? And you were talking about foreign-friendly Sudan. Is it this a theory or it's reality that is taking place now in Sudan? And my other question is, what is the government of Sudan doing to restore peace, tranquility in Sudan? Thank you.
What? The last point? To resolve what?
The government of Sudan, what does it do to restore peace? And yes, thank you.
Well, of course, as you might have heard, I am speaking as opposition, not government. But anyway, the fact is that the people of Sudan are not enjoying the richness of the country. That's why there is war in Sudan. There are civil wars that are, I think, that have led to what has led to this situation is the fact that a coup led by a minority party tried to impose a monolithic culture on people who have diverse cultural and religious identities. That is our tragedy. Our tragedy, in fact, goes against the aims and aspirations of this institute, because the aims and aspirations of this institute is that of cultural diplomacy. Unfortunately, in Sudan, this was what was eschewed by the government, and that's why there are the current conflicts that have raged in the country. And that is why we are in opposition to the current regime. But when I refer to Sudan's friendliness to foreigners, I am referring to the population, not the government. The government is not foreign friendly. They have expelled many humanitarian relief organizations. They are at loggerheads with the international community. The president is being criminalized for certain acts in Darfur. So I am not speaking on behalf of what's happening at the government level, but the people of Sudan are very, very foreigner friendly. And the contrast between the government and the people cannot be more wider. It is very wide. So the Sudan is suffering from the fact that we got this coup which tried to establish a monolithic culture on a country that is pluralistic, both in religion and in culture. And this is the tragedy of Sudan. We, as opposition figures, are trying to rectify this in order to create the atmosphere for human discourse, acceptance of plurality, acceptance of citizen equality, and so on. But your reference to the Sudan, if the reference is to Sudan government, the situation is now serious because of the conflict created by this attempt to apply a monolithic cultural program. But the people of Sudan, in contrast, are a very friendly people, and I have quoted the fact that both Christianity and Islam have spread in the Sudan peacefully. There was no conflict as a result of either. And that created in the Sudan a heritage of tolerance, that is quite conspicuous in the country's psyche.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Alexandra. I'm from Poland. And well, I wanted to ask about the recent news and development in Sudan, and how do you personally see the near future of Sudan after the split of southern Sudan?
This is unfortunate because the possibility is that we will have a Pakistan-India syndrome or a Kosovo-Serbia syndrome. This is what we hope to avoid, because the North can destabilize the South can destabilize the North. So there are cards in both parts of the country to really make themselves into failed states. The only alternative to this is to try, as what we seek as opposition figures, to try and agree between North and South upon what we call a special twin relationship. Because the two parts or the two countries have got so many things that cannot, something like twins that cannot be separated. For instance, there are millions of Southerners in the North who would like to continue living in the North and who should be given citizenship rights to continue to live in the North. Otherwise, there will have to be some kind of ethnic cleansing, which means war. Therefore, we say this needs to be naturalized. Secondly, a very great number of nomadic tribes in the North have got to migrate southwards in the summer for their cattle's grazing and water. This involves millions of such tribes. This has got to be guaranteed. If it is not guaranteed, and if anything obstructs their access to the grazing lands, this is another war. So there are so many such problems that need to be agreed. Also, there are issues like Kashmir between the two countries, between the two blocks of Sudan. We have got not one Kashmir, 20 Kashmirs in the border, each of which can become a casus belli, each of which can become a cause of war. So unless we in the North behave ourselves, remove the policies that have first led to self-determination and then separation, and realize that stability and good governance between the two parts of the Sudan is inseparable. You have got to do this. Unless we do this, we will have what many call the Pakistanization of Sudan, which is not only a Sudanese phenomenon. It can resonate in the whole of Africa, because in the whole of Africa there is a lot of difference in what you might call diversity, religious diversity and ethnic diversity. If the Sudanese solution of resolving conflict by separation becomes a precedent, then we have had Pandora's box, because it means that this will become a precedent, and many other places will imitate this unfortunate precedent. Anyway, the point that we hope we can do, that's what we are now trying to do as opposition political forces, is to reach an agreement with the new southern government on the basis of what we call a twin relationship, which we think should resolve the problems. Now, the 20 Kashmirs, I call them, or the 20 fault lines, are very threatening. That's why we suggested the formation of what we call a Wise People Commission. This Wise People Commission should be commissioned, should be accepted by both parties, and should be commissioned with the task of looking into these problems and given enough time, never mind 2 years, 3 years, enough time to settle the problems involved. Because the problems involved are not only north-south, there are populations who live in these fault lines, who have their own view and would like their view to be considered. No doubt, this is a very great challenge. The simple result of the present conflict is the renewal of war. But this is a very stupid thing because it will resolve nothing. We will just have bloodletting and bloodshed. And not only will we have bloodletting and bloodshed, but the Sudan will become a magnet to all the contradictions in the Horn of Africa, in the Red Sea, in the Mediterranean, Sub-Saharan and North Africa. The whole of the different snakes and scorpions and you name it will be attracted to the Sudanese situation, and we will have a very serious polarization, worse than that was which was in the Great Lakes area. This will be worse than the Great Lakes polarization. Therefore, it is not only a national Sudanese, it's a regional, it's an African problem, it's an international problem that the two Sudans be two peaceful neighbors that work on a win-win formula. Otherwise, we will let the dogs of war slip and all of us will be the sufferers.
I would very much like to express my gratitude to you for your messages really of inspiration, your messages of reconciliation, also of hope. I think really everything that you have done up until now for the people of Sudan, I think is really a living testament also to everything we're talking about in terms of reconciliation, cultural diplomacy. We wish you much success also in the continued struggles, the continued opposition that unfortunately we have. And I think we all carry a new hope, having heard also your messages and reflections this morning. So thank you very, very much. The Honorable Imam Al Sadig Al Mahdi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.